Yeah. You guys already.
Great. Perhaps if you give that to Harry. Hello, hello. Is this one on?
Hold on, that's mine.
Hello, is this working? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Harry Mount, editor of the greatest magazine in the universe, the Oldie, and so very kind of you to come today through wind and storm to hear three fantastic speakers. We are only here thanks to Noble Caledonia, a wonderful cruise ship company, crucially small cruise ships, and it's my job to fill in for the late, great Barry Cryer, whose jokes are still told beyond the grave and still account for a third of our website traffic. Only at the Oldie does a dead comedian dominate our airwaves. And this is one of his more bad taste jokes, so forgive me. Barry could tell it much better than I could, and he emphasized that he was told it by a blind man. That makes a huge difference. And here's Barry's joke. There was a blind parachutist who did jumps for charity. Someone asked him how he knew when he was getting near the ground, and he said, "The lead on my guide dog goes slack." Barry's joke from a blind man. But we miss Barry enormously. We also miss another Barry, the late, great Barry Humphries, a columnist for the Oldie for 3 years. And actually, funny enough, on Friday, the Australian state, the government, will be giving him a memorial at the Sydney Opera House, which you can actually watch on TV. It's 12 a.m. It's very early for Oldies on Friday morning, so late Thursday night. But it's amazing that the Australian state rewards him, because to begin with, Australia didn't really like Barry very much, but you at the Oldie always loved him, never complained about his genius. We had 4 columnists for the price of one, Barry Humphries. We had Barry Mackenzie, we had Dame Edna Everidge, and the great Sir Les Patterson. And how tolerant you all are. In 3 years of Barry's columns, no one ever objected to Sir Les saying some really filthy things, except for one writer to the Oldie who thought Sir Les was a real person and wrote to me saying, "The thoughts of Sir Les are absolutely disgusting. It's quite extraordinary that H.M. the Queen should have appointed him as her cultural attaché to the court of St. James." But we have 3 wonderful speakers here today. The first is actually a rock star. He's the lead singer in the group The Listening Device, who earlier this year played alongside The Who and UB40. But he also has a parallel life as the Duke of Beaufort, and his memoir, The Unlikely Duke, Memoirs of an Eclectic Life from Rock and Roll to Badminton House, has been very well reviewed, not least in the Oldie, where Mary Killen, our columnist, said, "The enjoyability of the book lies with the Duke's benign and unpretentious attitude to life." I loved this rare book. Ladies and gentlemen, Harry Beaufort.
Oh, yeah. I have got another one there, actually. This doesn't always happen when I'm on stage as a rock star, but... No, I'm probably one of the few people who lockdown proved to be not such a bad thing. Because at the beginning of 2020, I was preparing yet another year of parties, traveling, and general overindulgence. And then suddenly, I find myself locked down at Badminton with nothing to do except for sort of weekly estate meetings dealing with COVID-related matters. But I'm sure a lot of people in this room have vaguely felt that they've got a book in them. And some of you probably have produced some great works along the way. But, and I'd always seen that I might sort of be one of those people who never gets around to doing it. And that would have stayed the way, because I'm also have a problem that I'm incredibly lazy. And sort of rival the Sleeping Beauty whenever I'm meant to be doing something like work. But freed in lockdown, there was nothing else to do, with no parties, no golf, no band to play in. So I started writing this memoir, and it did help the boredom of the lockdown. But trouble was, I can't really claim to have led a particularly distinguished life, but I suppose I can provide insights into what it's like to live in a stately home and manage a large estate, which might be of interest to some people, see the vanishing traditions of the aristocracy. But on the whole, whilst I am involved in sort of vague country pursuits, such as hunting and shooting, I have also sort of ventured into sort of another life, and have sort of friends who are rock stars, actors, politicians, and even royalty. And some of the stories in my book cover that ground. They also cover that I have this endless quest of becoming a rock star myself, but after 40 years we haven't quite made it. But as a rock enthusiast, I have read a number of musicians' by autobiographies. And there's one that is probably the most critically acclaimed autobiography from somebody who's not particularly famous, called Viv Albertine, who had her band had a rather unattractive name of The Slits. And, but had a sort of famous opening line that said, anyone who writes an autobiography is either a twat or broke. And having a big, rather larger than normal house to run, I do have certain financial concerns, but I can't say that I'm broke. So I must be a twat, I suppose. But anyway, and although I may not have yet be sort of headlining at Glastonbury or anything like that, but I actually today find myself on stage with what could be one of the great sort of prog rock supergroups of Beaufort, Beard, and Brandreth. And I'm rather hoping that they might evolve into Emerson, Lake, and Palmer at some future stage. But anyway, after I had completed this book, I approached editors, publishers, and all that sort of stuff. And I was amazed that this very important work was not snapped up immediately. And there was a lot of advice going around. And the main advice that came back time and time again was that I should include more stories about royalty. But the trouble was that whilst I have met a few royalty on occasions, I don't have a sort of huge back catalogue of it. And, for example, the only time I ever went to Royal Ascot, to Windsor Castle to stay there, an absolute disaster. My car broke down about 2 miles away, and I had to charge to the gates of Windsor Castle on a boiling hot day, so literally pouring with sweat, and was ushered rather gently into the castle and sort of to change before the smart bit stuff began. And I think my book also relates a few encounters with Princess Diana, but perhaps the most portentous one was with Prince Harry, just to be topical. And he came to Badminton about 20 years ago for the 18th birthday of my niece. And this was held around the large circular swimming pool that my father had just built. And it was a gathering of rather awkward teenagers, including Harry himself. And they were just not really sort of comfortable talking with each other. But then suddenly, Harry sort of picked up one of the girls without any explanation and hurled her into the swimming pool. And initially everyone was a bit shocked, but then there was roars of laughter. And perhaps he wasn't particularly unaccustomed with such success from his jokes. He then proceeded to pick up another one, and then another girl, and then another girl. And he was rather like a sort of truck driver, heaving bags of coal onto the back of a lorry before solemnly going back to pick up another one. And but then eventually, so luckily my father's butler was there and sort of grabbed him by the sort of scruff of the neck and took him away, because it really was about to wreck the entire party. And at this point, my brother, who's a great fan of Dallas, that famous American soap opera, and he came up and whispered in my ear, he said, "Harry, we got to be real careful that boy's elder brother, nothing happens to him. I mean, real careful." But anyway, I was also told by my prospective publishers that I should include a little bit on what it's like to live in a house the size of Badminton. And I was a bit sort of reluctant to do this, as I didn't want to write a guidebook. And so I thought that the best way of dealing with this was to write a little bit about my cousin, who's a sort of 10th Duke of Beaufort, who was universally known as Master, like a sort of Doctor Who villain, but he was a sort of very unusual man in that his total obsession was hunting. And, that's what he really did sort of every day. But after the war, he decided to reduce his workload, and by seeking a joint master of the hunt, so he only had to work sort of 5 days a week or whatever. And so the word went out in the hunting community, and he got a sort of letter from a certain Major Gundry, who was serving in the army in India. And so he sort of looked at it, and all the sort of right ingredients seemed to be there. And so he sort of called an emergency meeting of the Hunt Committee and announced, "Marvellous news. Mahatma Gandhi wants to become master of the Beaufort Hunt." I had no idea that, that this rather drastic career change for a sort of visionary like that was going to be on offer. But despite his rather narrow outlook, people were sort of fascinated by his sort of just the sort of day-to-day issues of his life. And one day, my father was shooting somewhere, and a man came up and said, "What does Master have for breakfast?" So my father was a bit surprised by this question, and he said, well, probably didn't really know the answer, but he said, I think he has egg, bacon, and sausage. And then, so question answered. And then they shot for a little bit, and then the man came up again and said, "What, he likes a sausage, does he?" And there was sort of, he felt the conversation could have gone on literally all day, analysing the breakfast down to the very last detail. So that was, but the thing about Master that he was, well, he loved hunting and he was extremely good at it. And whereas I have a slight obsession of my own that I'm extremely bad at, which is golf. And I do, suddenly looking around the room, I suddenly see that golf is a sort of subject that sort of sends instant boredom into the room. But actually there are occasional stories in my book that are not really about golf, but about how funny sort of things happen on the golf course. But, and anyway, when I was really even more obsessed by golf than I was now, in 1997, I went with canvassing for David Cameron. And as anyone who's done canvassing probably knows, you spend a lot of time sort of hanging about. It's really quite boring. And so I had this very important golf tournament coming up after the election. So I began to sort of practicing my swing gently. And I suddenly find my body suddenly felt sort of lithe and lissom. And so I began moving a little bit more fully. And then suddenly I was doing full-blooded sort of golf swings, but unfortunately with this huge blue rosette on my chest. And suddenly a sort of constituency agent suddenly appeared. Said, "Look, for God's sake, stop this immediately." And there was a sort of group of we were on this sort of housing estate, and there was a group of sort of rather unwelcoming yobbos who were sort of guffawing with laughter at my misfortune. But anyway, the political result of all this was that David Cameron didn't get elected that year and had to wait another 4 years until he made it. But the other thing, I have been advised by sort of publishers and things, that what you've got to include in this book is sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And but sex, I think John Betjeman, in his autobiography, wrote that he wished he'd had more. And I rather sort of agree with that, but I have nevertheless rather boastfully included one or two of my own encounters on that front. And then as for drugs, I suppose I should have slightly wished that I'd had slightly less over the years, but I still recount that as well. And I have managed to meet and befriend a lot of rock stars who are considerably more successful than myself, and many of whom have actually survived their sex and drugs years with their brains and bodies surprisingly intact. But anyway, what I hope my book does convey is that no matter how supposedly privileged I am, which I am, it is really my family and friends and the people who I've met over the years who bring the colour and humour to my life. And it is them, and not just my very lucky background, that have provided me with the many pleasures that I've enjoyed and are in the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry. Our next speaker, her new book is called Emperor of Rome, but in fact, Mary Beard is the real Empress of Rome. In over 20 books, from Pompeii, The Life of a Roman Town, to SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome, she's become the undisputed champion of the Roman world.